Hi, everyone. I'm Hattie Brett, the editor of Grazia and the current chair of the BSME. And my job really today is quite basic. It's to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here for our latest BSME social masterclass. Now, these sessions were very much designed so that we could grill those at the heart of platforms that I know that we all use daily about how, as magazine editors and brand champions, we can get the most out of them for our brands. So today, I'm really delighted, thank you, to be joined by Julia White, the head of lifestyle and magazine content partnerships at Twitter, which are a very appropriate title to be here today, Julia. So thank you for being here. Julia will start by presenting an overview of Twitter's work with partners and tease you with some new innovations that are coming up at Twitter. And let me tell you, I've been lucky enough to have a sneak preview of it. I'm in charge of sharing it, which is slightly freaking me out. But let me tell you, I will definitely be taking notes, and you guys should be too. And then I will ask her some questions at the end. And you know the drill by now, but please do, as Julia's talking, drop any questions you've got into the Q&A box, and I will do my best to ask her as many of them as I can. For now, though, it's over to you, Julia, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Hattie. And it really feels like we should be in person by now at this point, doesn't it? I've just, in you sharing, I've just lost my screen, so just bear with me 1 second. Technical glitch within a second. Right, I am back. So thank you so much for having me here. I'm, as Hattie said, I'm Julia White, head of lifestyle and magazine content partnerships here in the UK. My pronouns are she, her. I've got dyed blonde hair and I'm wearing a pale pink blouse. Today, I'm going to give you the 280 on Twitter right now and how you can use it best in 4 simple parts. So first up, why Twitter and why now? A quick refresh for you all. Secondly, I'm going to present your Twitter playbook, which is a key to getting the most out of Twitter right now as a brand and a publisher. I'll then touch on not only how to grow reach, but revenue too. And finally, a look at what you can expect next from our platform. So first of all, a quick refresher. Twitter is what's happening now and what people are talking about right now. We're the undisputed home for breaking news and real-time public conversation for sports, music, entertainment, tech, seismic culture shifts, and much, much more. So take the fuel crisis this week, for example. This, as we all know, was the main headline. So ministers meeting over petrol supply problem, that's the straight news. What Twitter really cared about, though, other than personally filling their tanks, was what one Twitter user, Graham, pointed out on Saturday morning, that the BBC had sent out exactly the right man for the job, Phil McCann. Before long, Twitter, as it does best, had come into its own with a string of memes, photoshops, lols, the suggestion of his sister Sue Pearl-Leonard getting involved. Another namesake, Phil Daly, wailed in, saying he was expected to be booked for Monday when people are coming back every day. And then before long, the original Phil McCann got involved too. So he was directly replying to tweets. Someone asked him, did he actually fill his can? I did not, don't even have a can, he replied. And he started kind of getting involved, tweeting himself. He was thrilled that he was trending. He made fun of his own name and kind of referenced being back in school in year 9. By the end of the day, he trended on Twitter. There were numerous stories written about him, including even the BBC had obviously got involved. And it was a great example of how Twitter can get its hands on a news story, move it on, and create a whole new story in itself. And it's what becomes what people are really talking about in the moment. So it's this kind of behavior that we find really sets our audience apart. So you might have audiences on other platforms who have a look at me mentality, but people on Twitter are different. They will say, look at that. They're very much pointing, look at this. And that's what sort of really sets them apart. They come to Twitter hungry for information and connection to the world around them. And they together make and shape the conversations that drive the news and culture. So we've looked at we've looked at when Twitter talks, we see that the world follows. We've looked at press mentions and found that Twitter drives disproportionately higher media coverage than other platforms due to its agenda setting audience. User growth is also another strong indicator of a platform's relevance in the broader media landscape, of course. And we found that in the past 2 years, we've tripled our growth of daily active users. But as we continue to grow, we continue to prioritize the health of the conversation. And that is something we really believe, that conversations should be free and safe from abuse, harassment, and misleading information. So we've made health on the platform our number one priority over the last 3 years. And we've done this in an array of ways. We've rolled out product features, for example, conversation controls, which you may have tried yourself, which allow you to decide who can reply to your tweets, whether you just want it to be selective people, and you can actually add this retrospectively after you've tweeted too. And we're also experimenting with a small pilot called Birdwatch, which will be a crowdsourced moderation tool to let the community fact check itself. We've implemented policies that make it easier to find credible information. You've probably seen now the proactive prompts. So if you try to share an article without having read it, you will be prompted on whether you actually want to read the article first, to make sure you're not just sharing without actually knowing what you're sharing. And we found that has sparked a 33% increase in people reading articles prior to retweeting. So it actually really has had an effect. And we work as a team with various partners globally to help inform our policies and keep us accountable. These are kind of the partnerships that are driving industry-wide change when it comes to safety on the platform. So, as a publisher, what should you be focusing on right now to kind of really nail Twitter? And I'm going to talk through now a kind of Twitter playbook. I'm going to whip through, but please feel free to ask more questions. And obviously I can go into more detail on a personal level at any point. So first up, our brand new audio tool, Spaces, which can really bring your brand to life using the depth of an audio conversation. This is something that we are super excited about at Twitter. You've probably seen it pop up on your screen. We've had it in beta for several months now, and people are gradually using it in really exciting and new ways. So when should you use Spaces? You could call it almost like a sort of a live podcast that feeds into the Twitter conversation. And I think the opportunities are endless for when it comes to publishers, especially when you have such great content that you're sitting on that you can kind of utilize and tap into. So you could use them to build a big buzz around a big editorial moment. So you may have a new content series that you really want to showcase. You can use it as a launch moment. You can hold a little premiere party. It's an open space where you can bring your readers in and have a live kind of content moment ahead of launching something really unique and different. So we've seen examples of this on the platform. They are great for connecting the community and bringing your audience closer to your talent. So in a way that you would maybe host a panel or do a junket interview, you can bring your fans into that and give them that access where they feel that they're really in the room with those people that you're chatting to as journalists. This has worked really well. You can bring members of the space up to the mic. You still have complete control, but you can bring them up and let them feel like they're actually really meeting that talent, that top tier talent. You can create a pre or post event destination. So you could have either, if you're doing an award ceremony that is part of your brand, you can use the space as a pre-party hangout or an after party and make it feel really exclusive and bring your biggest kind of most dedicated followers along. You can also spot really meaningful conversations. So Gay Times did a really great example of this during Pride. They had a series called Pride Heroes that they ran weekly across Pride Month, and it felt really intimate, and they had some really sort of great intimate discussions in the space. So I think there's a real opportunity for going very sort of deep and meaningful and intimate with Spaces. And then there are spaces where, like bin space, which I don't know if you were there, but you did have to really be there to get the beauty of it. But what started off as a conversation about bin collection times ended up with people like chatting into the wee hours about sustainability, and it became full of green experts, representatives from charities. The Lib Dems were hanging out in there. And it was a very, very Twittery, UK Twitter, I would even say, use of spaces, which we hope to kind of see again. But it very much kind of came alive one random weeknight, and it was a brilliant example of a Twittery space. What a time to be alive, # bin space. And they even had like an after party to 1 a.m. Very Twitter. Next up, I will talk to you briefly about Twitter Live. So as the second screen and first scroll for many cultural events happening in the world, we've seen huge growth with live streaming on Twitter. And obviously, with the absence of real life events, it's been even more important during the pandemic. Here's a grab of Glamour's Women of the Year awards that was streamed on Twitter. And it just really helped people feel, part of the conversation, part of the event on the platform. Often we find that the biggest conversation around any live event is happening on Twitter anyway. So why not bring the kind of live stream right into the middle of the conversation? And it saw brilliant results. They were able to simultaneously stream across various platforms. For them, that worked really well. It feels like something that is only growing, even as we're coming back to real life events. So I'm very excited to kind of hear new ideas for ways of live streaming. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Twitter Moments. So Moments is still kind of the best way to own the conversation on the platform and position yourself on the shop window of Twitter. If you go to the Explore tab, that will be curated by our expert curation team and will be filled with moments, because they really they explain the key stories on Twitter and powered by tweets. So they're just a brilliant way of kind of encapsulating the biggest stories on Twitter. So I always encourage people to make moments and keep making moments and let us know that you're making moments, because our curation team are really looking for these. We know that you're the experts on the biggest stories. So whether it's one of your own stories that you're exclusive, your story, that you own the narrative, or if you're just explaining a super cool story that's relevant to your readers, then that's great too. They're both really good uses of moments. They also provide great opportunities to get your brand seen beyond maybe your followers. So maybe one of your tweets will feature in a moment. Maybe your tweets will be used to contextualize trends on the Explore tab, because they're always looking for those. But as I said, often they will pluck one of your partner moments and put them on that Explore tab, and that will really bring in a host of new followers, and you'll see kind of all boats rise in terms of engagement and following. So I'm going to go into a little bit about sort of how to make a good moment and when you should. If you go to the next slide, why you should be making moments. I touched on it really, but really you can either dig deeper into a narrative of a story that's yours. So you own a story, it's either written or it's video form, but you can really unpack it in a moment, tweet by tweet, by using those tweets, either ones of your own. Maybe you could bring the talent tweet in. It's kind of really to bring the story to life and own that moment in a thread. And the alternative is to kind of explain what's happening. So often you land on Twitter, the middle of the day, you've been doing loads of other stuff. Something is trending. You have no idea why. If you're the publisher that's creating why actually does this matter? Like, why has everyone gone crazy about this? It's actually a really big benefit, because the curation team won't create that from Twitter's voice. They're always looking for our expert premium publisher partners to represent that and to really decode it for the audience. So that's a great opportunity. And how to make an engaging moment. I'll whip through this because you're all brilliant at writing and at editing and at selling. So you know all this stuff anyway, but make sure the title is, you know, succinct and eye-catching and conversational. That's key. Keep your voice, you know, whatever Twitter voice you have for your brand, see that through onto the moment. And then with the description bit below, have that, you know, 2 sentences max, but kind of a really neat description that sums up why this story matters and why you should tap in. So pretty simple, keep it eye-catching, succinct, and very much with your strong voice. And then pick a really strong cover image that sums up the mood of the moment. That's obviously the slot on the screen that takes up pretty much most of the screen. So just make sure that cover image is, you know, clear and eye-catching and just sums up the mood. And then when you're picking the tweets, choose carefully, make sure they're credible, you know, definitely use from the source. And if you've got anybody engaging with your moment or engaging with that story, please, you know, add those in, and just from a kind of a variety of different voices and viewpoints, so it feels like the real crux of the story is kind of nailed. So Q&As, you know, if you have been a fan of Twitter for as long as the hardcore, you will know that Twitter Q&As are sort of the bread and butter, and one of the things that people have always loved most about when talent come onto Twitter, and they've always been loved. These days we've kind of upgraded them, and you can create a really lovely, very sort of live and beautiful Q&A using our VIT app, and it will give you video answers, very seamless in terms of showing who the video is replying to. You can thread them together beautifully. The previous example was one of Euphoria. They're always great for talent, you may just have a little snap, you may just have access to talent at the end of something that you're doing with talent. They just bring the audience in, and they just add another dimension. They're also great for example, Love Island, this series. They had all the videos, you know, that were pulled, the grabs from the TV, but they also pulled them for a Q&A chat on Twitter after every couple exited. And it was just a really nice way of continuing the conversation on the platform where people were talking about the TV show. So you can just feed and extend that craze with the Q&A app, and it's super easy to use. Conversation controls. So I referenced them a bit earlier in terms of safety, and they are very, very good in terms of allowing controlling who can reply to your tweets and giving you that element of protection. But we also think they're actually cool for using them creatively. So you can have a Q&A go on between 2 people on the platform and have only those, you know, not have a huge amount of other chat going on. So you can keep the noise to a minimum, and you can make something really special. Perhaps it's a panel, perhaps it's a select set of audience members who've been selected to be part of this kind of special conversation that then plays out on the platform. So there are lots of ways of using conversation controls, and we feel quite excited about the potential still, as well as the protective element. So I mentioned this before, but tell us if you're doing anything cool, whether it's live, whether it's a moment, whether it is a Q&A, or some kind of way that you've decided to experiment. Tell us, because we can surface that content. We can ask for house budget. We can really give you the support you need. Maybe we've got access to the VIT app that you may not have already used, but yeah, just keep telling us, so that we know and we don't miss that stuff. So now I'm going to talk a bit about revenue and how you can, just as much as you can, create an amazing organic presence using Twitter. You can also really use it as a robust way of earning revenue. So firstly, our Amplify program, which some of you may be familiar with, but it allows you to earn both revenue and reach on your best content through brand alignment. So we know that you guys are our premium partners on the platform, creating the very best content. And we know that brands are desperate to align with that content. They very much would love to have the kudos and the expertise that you all have in terms of your content. And so what we offer them is Amplify, which is pre-roll against that content. So the pre-roll, the content comes from the publisher handle, and the pre-roll is seen by the advertiser's target audience. And it's a brilliant program that brands absolutely love. Agencies and clients pretty much put Amplify on every single media buy now because they love it. And we see it in two different ways. So you've got Amplify pre-roll, which is a much more programmatic in its being. So it's more a plug-in and play. You sign up and you tweet, you publish your videos as you would, and equally the brand decides they want to pre-roll a category, say lifestyle, and they will programmatically be matched against your content. It's a much more hands-off and a kind of low-level, always-on solution. Twitter Amplify sponsorships sees a brand specifically choose your content. And these are some examples that we've run recently. So we had SkinCeuticals aligned with Harper's Bazaar's Skin School because they really wanted to go along that kind of premium beauty route. This is a Grazia campaign that was Pucker Herbs. And it was all about sleep and getting a better night's sleep. And Pucker Herbs wanted to align with Grazia for that. And you can see how it displays there, promoted by Pucker Herbs, but on the Grazia handle. And then lastly, I've thrown in a fitness example, which saw Runner's World working with Under Armour's brand ambassador, Emma, to help runners give tips to them. And in this particular case, it was about mental strength. These are just examples. We're running these all the time. We have so much interest from brands. It's really exciting to work on this. And as I mentioned, there's a revenue part to it and a reach part to it. The brand spend goes into promoting the tweets. So not only do you take away revenue, but you're also seeing all boats rise when it comes to the video views, impressions on the tweets, engagement on the tweets, and followers. You're seen by a much wider audience. So it's really, we love working on it. You also will be able to sell spaces. So this is adding spaces into your Amplify program. So it's a sponsored space. So you can think about ways that you can bring brands and advertisers on board if you're doing a space, and maybe that, you know, they would be sort of wanting to align with a certain topic. And this is kind of the way that you can have that space promoted by them, and the brand attribution can come in the text around it. And we're also monetizing all of our other innovations. So moments are now sponsorable. Q&A is sponsorable. So all of these ideas that we've talked through can absolutely have a sponsored element to them. This was an example where Condé Nast Traveller did a East of England beautiful beaches moment, which was sponsored by Visit Britain. And it was actually worked for them beautifully editorially. And Visit Britain had an ad slot in tweet 4 and 8 of the moment. So that's how it sort of plays out. So what's next? What's kind of coming up? We're always, new developments. So firstly, earlier this month, we started testing our first ever subscription offering called Twitter Blue in Canada and Australia. So it's a new way for people to manage their content and customize their experience, such as bookmark folders, undo tweet functionality, and reader mode. We're playing around with this all the time, and we're tweaking and looking for feedback, and we're really hoping to be able to roll it out into more markets. So watch this space. We've also got new ways for people to support influencers and creators on Twitter. So we've got 2 new ways. There's super follows, which is going to add an additional layer of access. So maybe you've got a real niche and access to information and a real following, and you can basically take on super followers who will sort of pay to access that extra information first. And that's really for people who've got a very strong engaged following around a niche content. And then tip jar, which we love, which just allows you to simply, you've gone viral, instead of having check out my page, it's just tip me, like you appreciated my content, send me something. And you can also, we've added a charity button too, so that's another sort of element to that. So we're having some fun with rewards and really like allowing creators to kind of earn from their great success stories. And we recently acquired Review, which is a service that makes it easier to publish editorial newsletters. So we're working on bringing that in. So you can now there's now a button that can connect your review newsletter, so that you can directly use your audience that you've grown on Twitter and plug them straight into a newsletter audience, which we know is so important, especially for journalists and brands and freelancers. So there's going to be lots more coming on that, and we're building on that sort of day by day. So just to summarize, our audience is our superpower. To try Spaces, it can bring your brand to life via audio. It gives a whole different angle to Twitter that perhaps the text couldn't. Monetize your best tweets. We really are finding ways to monetize absolutely everything that you're putting out, and watch this space for more.
Thank you so much, Julia. That was so much information, and I feel like if you're like me and you were scribbling notes frantically during that, rest assured that we will have this recording up on the BSME YouTube channel for you to go and look at again. But loads of food for thought, I think, and certainly from the things that we've done with you, we've always found you guys brilliant to work with and really interesting, and a good learning, I think, for us along the way. I'm going to dive into questions because there are a lot and we haven't got loads of time, sadly. And almost, I guess, taking it back to basics, I mean, that was a lot of innovation and lots of great ideas. But one of the questions that came up most when I was talking to my BSME committee members in advance of this session, Julia, was the basic, really. Like, how do you nail your brand's tone of voice on Twitter? You know, how do you strike the balance between being corporate and, as one of them said, and I promised I would put in this, performative sassiness?
So I think the voice is very key, and I think corporate we want to be towards performative sassiness rather than corporate, for sure, but you want to be authentic. So I think it's about being a relatable, authentic, and kind of identifiable voice. I'm sure that it's something that's done with each of your brands for your marketing, but it's kind of almost picturing your brand as that person and thinking as that person as a full 360 character, and then how would that person communicate on Twitter in a very authentic way. And it's that authenticism, I think, that stops it feeling performative. But I think definitely we find that the most engaging content is the most real content, and having a moment, like the fuel crisis film, Phil McCann, it's all just, that's the stuff that takes off. It's the stuff that's just real people spotting stuff. So I think if you're a brand and the furthest you can get to that, the more sort of successful in that environment.
It's almost like your slide of Instagram's a very polished version of the horse, and Twitter's the slightly more playful, real version.
Yeah, there's loads of memes of that as it is. In terms of Twitter, you would never put a polished polished picture up. So it's pretty much the same. It's be real, and that will really get you noticed. Those are the stuff that's the stuff that gets you noticed on the platform.
And again, then back to basics, I think so much of your presentation was really interesting about monetizing content, but we didn't talk about what I think many of our audience today will also think about with Twitter, which is simply driving traffic to their own site at its most basic function. And I accept that is a very basic function of Twitter these days. But thinking about that for a minute, what's your advice on how brands should be doing that effectively? And actually, should that really be the primary thing that they're thinking about, given all of the things that you just talked about in the presentation? Or is it actually, that should come at the bottom of the list now?
So I think back in the day when we were publishers and I used to work in publishing before, and we would tweet links, and we would sort of hope that those links would, it would be directing people back. And that was kind of the sole focus. I think there is still very much a place for saying my content exists here. This is the content I've created, and I'm going to advertise that on Twitter. But I think there's clever ways of doing it. So for example, with moments, if you have, and I think there was an example there from the Sunday Times, but if you have a really brilliant exclusive, don't just kind of post it and hope that people will direct back to the site, but really pull out the best of it and present it in a very Twitter way. So in a string of engaging tweets, thread it together into a moment, and then sell that moment on the shop front of Twitter, by encouraging the curation team to kind of flag it as this is really interesting to the Twitter audience here, but it will also encourage people to go and read more. So I think that's very much still something you can do. But I think that goes hand in hand with saying it's also a brilliant place to create your brand. We talked about the fact that it's picked up, that generally the press picks up Twitter more than lots of other social platforms. So in terms of it being a really great place for marketing the brand, I think that's still a really core focus. And I think the fact that we've got these revenue opportunities means that you can also have it as a standalone revenue generating model for your brand, which hopefully alleviates some of the need for the traffic to drive the revenue. So we want to kind of make it sustainable, and that's what Twitter sponsorships and Amplify is doing, really, is creating that stable revenue.
And I love that example of the Sunday Times exclusive. And, for me as an editor who spends a lot of time, probably disproportionately, thinking about cover lines and how, my issue is going to sell on the newsstand, for me, that's a really interesting example of okay, so I should take the same approach with an exclusive, but look at how I can sell it on Twitter and work with you guys to sell it in the best way. So that's my big takeaway. But I suppose, talk to us about the inspiration that you've seen. What other magazine brands have you seen do brilliant things that we can all learn from?
Well, we've had a lot of fun with Grazia.
Yeah.
This was not a teed up question, but we've had a lot of fun with Grazia. Creating a new live show. It's called It's the Week To. And with that, it was basically saying, well, there's a bit of how can we use the live functionality on Twitter to create something that feels a bit like a podcast, but a bit more Twittery than that. We came up with this idea of It's the Week To, which would be your kind of one-stop shop for the Grazia editor's take on what you need to know this week. And that it would go out and it would be a kind of hosted format, and that it would go out live weekly. And we've done it, and we sold it to Tesco. So it has been a revenue driver as well. But that was a really great example of using live differently. I think there's always space for that, especially coming through the pandemic and people really, really wanting to kind of listen to podcasts, though that kind of sort of magazine format on a podcast. We have, so Days magazine have been doing really great spaces. So they like to innovate. As soon as there's a new product, they want to jump on it. And we did a really great, they did a great space with Sadiq Khan, just as London was opening up. They did a kind of back to life, back to London, and it was just a really nice lunchtime listen with some really sort of key people talking about really important stuff. But I think the great thing about Spaces is you can kind of listen in. You're there at this super cool event, but you don't have to be dressed up. You could be just having your lunch and you're listening in and you're feeling like you can kind of participate. So that was really exciting. I think we see Glamour are doing loads of moments. In fact, Condé Nast are doing loads in general, but Glamour are doing loads of moments with their very strong tone of voice. It's like, this is why this is important, and it works really well for that audience. And the curation team really sort of, you can see their appreciation because they're summing up the trends. So yeah, and we've also done some really exciting stuff on the kind of Amplify side, where we've had integration of brands, integration, as you saw, of Under Armour's ambassadors within Runner's World content. So there's lots going on. Those are kind of a few, I would say.
Yeah, amazing. I love those examples, and not just because Grazie's mentioned. And I promised the audience that wasn't that question. I didn't know you were going to say that, but I think, again, from my side, I think what I would add to that is that we've been working really closely with you guys, and actually I think sometimes it can, what we benefit from is your expertise, and we have our creativity. And so I think not to make sure that you're going to be deluged with emails after this, but sometimes that's a real kind of great partnership to go into it. But I want to return to Amplify, I suppose, because one of the questions that's come through is about how you monetize video on Twitter without, as they put it, a huge roller coaster each month. And a lot of people have said that their pre-roll revenue on Twitter oscillates wildly.
So with Amplify Pre-Roll, which is our programmatic, which I told you about, it is seasonal. It is reliant on how much advertisers spending at that time, the advertiser demand, how much other publisher content is going out there. So generally, when I'm speaking to publishers, I say, don't try and look into those figures too closely. Don't try and second guess them. They will wax and wane, dependent on the seasonality and all the other factors I just mentioned. Sponsorships, which I work on as well, obviously, is easier to predict because we're getting into more of a rhythm of the number of briefs that are coming through. And we work very closely in terms of packaging up content. So as Q4 is just about to hit, so we're packaging up Christmas, Black Friday, we're knowing what we're going after, we're knowing what advertisers are out there on the table and what the kind of brands that publishers that they're looking for and the content they're looking for. One thing I would say in terms of to take control of the revenue is that you can absolutely sell Amplify in your internally. And in the US, we find that 80% of all Amplify revenue is actually done by the teams internally at the publishers, who are finding it a brilliant sales piece to kind of peg on to other deals they're doing. Sometimes they have extra inventory, there's definitely kind of it's basically being worked into media plans now from the other side of things. So I'm really happy to support anybody who wants me to kind of come in and talk to sales teams or work a bit on that. I'd love to grow that, and then you will start to see a bit more of predictability in that, because it's the brands you're talking to anyway. They love your brand, they're loyal to your brand. Whereas when we're talking from a Twitter point of view, they love Twitter, and we're bringing the publisher in as a bonus. So yeah, I think that would be something that I'd love to do, sort of strive for the future.
That sounds good. And also then give us a heads up on Q4, Christmas, Black Friday. Is there anything else we should be thinking about and coming to you with?
Good question. Well, we always love sort of Halloween, but I think it's and bonfire night, and we always get excited, crazy about that. I think the key thing actually, and this isn't necessarily seasonal, but is sustainability. It's whether it's whatever it seems to be rising to the surface in terms of every ask, whether they're in retail or whether they're in autos. So I think having a really niche sustainability package, whether it's green fashion or whatever kind of, whether it's food, that is something I'm always looking for. And Black History Month coming up, so that's obviously a big one. We're getting loads of asks around that, so that's an interesting one for October.
Cool, that's good to know. A question here from Tim about Twitter review, I think you called it, but I could have got that wrong. Does it create an actual emailed newsletter, or does it deliver the newsletter within the Twitter platform?
It exists as a separate email. It's just a way of clicking. The deal means that it will be a one click away, so that you can drive your Twitter following to sign up to that newsletter. You've still got your newsletter as you would. You've still got all the functionality of review, and we've still got the review team sitting within Twitter, so we can set up conversations with them to talk about kind of how best to, all the functionality and how to sign up to review. But it's about having a really seamless way into review from your Twitter handle, and therefore like maximizing that audience you already have, rather than having a newsletter and then trying to plug it into all of your followers.
Great, that makes sense. So it's basically, if you've got a great newsletter, this is the tool you need to market it and drive that database.
Exactly. And you've probably, if you're a writer, you've probably already got your core audience on Twitter. That's probably where you've built it first.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And then a question like slightly separate, I suppose, to the things that we've talked about thus far, which was about trolling, which raises kind of a serious point. And I know you've talked about controlling conversations to a certain extent, but I know, from my perspective, we've had individual journalists under our team that have been criticised for things they've put out there, and social media managers under pressure when the atmosphere can get toxic at times. So how would you advise that we approach that as editors with duties of care for our team?
So I think firstly, kind of having best practice internally of what you would communicate on Twitter and how you would conduct yourself, as an individual, and how you basically would feed that into being part of the brand. We have a worksheet, one page of safety tools to share, which is really useful. It's how to kind of mute or block or report. So making sure that everybody is absolutely up to scratch in terms of knowing how to kind of deal with any sort of tweets that don't feel right coming their way. And if you're kind of reporting, any kind of incidents, then always feel free to sort of send them my way to escalate, to make sure that, so there's that, having that really robust understanding of how to report, block and mute if you're in that situation. And conversation controls, the idea that you can, if you've got a particular post that is going in a situation, the replies are going a certain way and it's making that person feel uncomfortable, then retroactively applying the conversation controls to remove that. I think as a kind of editor, making sure that all your staff have got access to knowing the full conversation controls, knowing how you can use them, having this sheet of kind of safety tools, and then just knowing that that's all part of an internally shared best practice.
Great, that sounds good, and something we should definitely follow up on, because I didn't know about conversation controls. So I think that's been really useful. But I want to end, I suppose, in a more positive space, because I think this has been such a great conversation. So if you were to give our audience today one takeaway of what they should be doing now on Twitter and how they should best be working with you, what would it be?
Great.
Putting you on the spot there, Julia.
Well, I would say give spaces a try, because I feel like the audio is kind of the thing right now, and it just feels really experimental. And when things are experimental, you can own them and you can make a name for yourself, and you can be the case study and the example that everybody's talking about. And that just goes into decks and on into PDFs, and then before you know it, you're the person that did that space. And I think in terms of just always feel free to chat to me. We do sort of have really strong relationships. We pride ourselves on that Twitter, that our partners are so important to us, and that's our core job, is to kind of basically work with you come with the one thing you want to gain, and us to try and deliver that. So I'm at Julia White on Twitter. DM me, my DMs are open. I always love to chat, even if it's just about coffee. That's my number one. Flat white
coffee and monochrome, I think of you as. But that's good to know. And actually, my meeting after this is about Twitter Spaces. So there you go, real life example of where we're trying to come up with some ideas of fun things we can do on there. So thank you so much, Julia. That was really useful. And I'm going to go into this meeting, with loads of ideas, which is great. And we'll all say, what's been going on? And that's the benefit to everyone watching of the BSME. I hope you've enjoyed this social masterclass, and there are more coming up. So on Tuesday, the 5th of October at 1 p.m, we'll be meeting Pinterest, who'll talk to us about how to best use their platform. And the final session is on Thursday, the 21st of October, where we will be talking about TikTok and picking the brains of TikTok masters. So please join us for those, and check out the BSME website for more details of how to reserve your place now. Also, I should say, join us for the summer party, which was a summer party, is now an autumn party at the Nolita Social in Knightsbridge, which is our first real life event for 18 months and takes place on the 12th of October. So I really hope that we'll all see you there. And Julia, your invite is winging its way over to you as I speak, because you need to come to, which would be great.
Thank you.
So yeah, please book for all of those things and join us at the next ones. And my final thank you is to Readly, who work with us very closely at the BSME. And as you'll all know, you can get unlimited access to thousands of magazines and newspapers all in one app. So thanks to them. But massive thanks to Julia and to Twitter. Thank you for inspiring us and giving us lots of inspiration that we can take away and use in our day jobs.
Thank you for having me.